Commander Grigori speaking.
Grigori 4, command sent. Copy.
Media, you command vessels in that set.
S-18, command sending, turning the headlight off.
Yes, on
Chicken in the center seat of the descent module, the centermost portion of the Soyuz spacecraft, is loading into the onboard computers deorbit and entry information, along with all of the telemetry information for the various sites that will be picking up the track of the Soyuz as it enters the Earth's atmosphere and plummets its way toward the landing site in south-central Kazakhstan, eventually to touchdown softly under a main parachute at 8:49 p.m. Central Time this evening. Again, in Zhezkazgan, Kazakhstan, which is the staging point for tonight's landing and recovery operations, a team of NASA and European Space Agency personnel have joined the Russian Search and Recovery Forces, the civilian recovery agency that goes by the name of Rosaviatsa, for tonight's recovery of the Expedition 37 crew. The NASA team is led by Deputy ISS Program Manager Joel Montalbano, Sean Fuller, who's the Director of Human Spaceflight Operations in Russia, NASA's Chief Astronaut Bob Bankin. Other personnel include NASA Public Affairs Officer Josh Byerly, NASA Headquarters Photographer Carla Chofi. There are flight surgeons on board representing both NASA and the European Space Agency to attend to Karen Nyberg and Luca Parmitano, along with Russian nurses and other medical personnel. Again, they will be boarding Russian Mi-8 helicopters for about a 40 to 45-minute flight from Zhezkazgan to the landing site. That will cover about 145 kilometers or 90 miles en route to the landing zone where the Soyuz is expected to touch down, with landing schedule 3 hours and 15 minutes from now. Those helicopters will be deployed in sequential fashion, with the most critical personnel from the Search and Recovery Forces and Arasi Energia that built the Soyuz spacecraft, and which is instrumental in the extraction of the crew and the safing of the vehicle. The spacecraft will arrive on scene with these dozen Russian Mi-8 helicopters and the recovery personnel flying within those helicopters
5340
in a circular pattern around the landing zone, awaiting the arrival of the Soyuz under its main chute. Once the Soyuz touches down, whether it be vertical or on its side, those helicopters will then land in sequential fashion, and the personnel will make their way to the spacecraft to begin the process of opening up the hatch and extracting the crew, placing them in comfortable chairs for a period of adaptation in those sub-freezing temperatures, basically to enable them to get their land legs back a bit before they're carried in those chairs to an inflatable medical tent that will be erected just about 100 yards or so away from the spacecraft itself. You can see the Soyuz spacecraft drifting away from the International Space Station against the limb of the Earth, continuing its opening rate toward a distance eventually of about 12 kilometers or 7.5 miles away from the station for the deorbit burn that is scheduled at 7:55 p.m. Central Time. And there's a good zoom-in look at the Soyuz spacecraft with Fyodor Yurchikhin, Karen Nyberg, and Luca Parmitano in the descent module, beginning the trek home to wrap up their 5.5 months in space. Once the crew is extracted from the vehicle and they are brought into the inflatable medical tent for initial medical testing, that will take about an hour and a half. The crew then will be placed in an all-terrain vehicle, in 3 separate all-terrain vehicles, and driven a short distance to their respective helicopters. They'll board the helicopters for a 2-hour flight back to Karaganda from the landing site. That's about 236 miles or so They will arrive in Karaganda for a welcoming ceremony, a short welcoming ceremony by local Kazakh personnel before they'll board their planes to fly back home.
Go ahead. You have the headlights off. S-17.
The Soyuz vehicle you're looking at was launched on May 29th for a 6-hour trek to the International Space Station. The road home from now until landing, 3 hours and 12 minutes.
What about Rus? It's okay for you? Check. Thank you.
МКС по Москве, ВСГ-2 для Сергея.
MCC Moscow SS on Space to Ground 1, on Space to Ground 2.
Положение закрыто.
About transitioning over there, and Perkov into the closed position. Go ahead.
Сергей, можно КВД ПРК ТК
KVD PRK can be transitioned into the closed position and we will perform a reconfig into the undock configuration. Okay, copy.
Stowed inside that Soyuz vehicle, the Olympic torch that arrived on the International Space Station only 3.5 days ago, which on Saturday was taken outside for a high-flying photo opportunity by Oleg Kotov and Sergei Rosansky during their 5-hour, 50-minute spacewalk. And now loaded inside the Soyuz for the trip home and a flight back to Moscow, where it will be turned over once again to officials of the Sochi Olympic Organizing Committee to resume its place in the Olympic relay that is ongoing, eventually to make its way into the Fisht Stadium in Sochi, Russia on February 7th to light the flame that will mark the opening of the 2014 Winter Olympics. Flying over the North Pacific, a beautiful view of the Soyuz TMA 09M, the serenity of the North Pacific Ocean underneath at a distance of 262 statute miles The Soyuz continuing an opening rate that will place it some 12 kilometers or 7.5 miles away from the station at the time of the deorbit burn that is scheduled
slightly. I will let you know when.
2 hours and 14 minutes from now at 7:55 p.m. Central Time.
Da, что, намного лучше.
Inaudible.
Немножко придем в себя, а потом перед динамикой опять застрелил. Конечно.
Well, I think you can get a short break and then you can transition it up prior to the dynamic op. Of course.
Moscow station on SG1. Sergey, go ahead on SG1.
Very little space.
Нет, это ты большой.
No, just you are too big.
Let you know that TK is closed. Copy. Thank you very much. And we have established comm for undocking. Sergey, if Oleg and Mikhail are close by, I have a proposal to conduct a DPC with the Russian crew members. So all the radiograms are on orbit. If you guys are ready, let us know. I'm ready as well to wrap things up for today.
You can see as the Soyuz continues to fly over the northern Pacific Ocean, the white section at the bottom, that's the instrumentation and propulsion module, where the thrusters and engines are. Obviously, the solar arrays spread as they were just at the time that the Soyuz first reached orbit back on May 29th. The bulbous upper portion of the Soyuz, that's the orbital module that during the launch to docking time frame provides a bit more room for the crew members to stretch their legs and use the facilities in that compartment. And of course the middle section, the only section that returns to Earth, that's the key. That's where your three crew members are. Karen Nyberg in the right seat, Fyodor Yurchikhin, the Soyuz commander, in the center seat, and the board engineer, number one, for tonight's operations, Luca Parmitano of the European Space Agency, in the left seat. The Soyuz and the International Space Station moving from northwest to southeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. All quiet on board the spacecraft as Yurchikhin, Nyberg, and Parmitano monitor their controls and their cockpit displays and are going through checklists that will enable them to be in position for the deorbit burn that is scheduled just 2 hours and 9 minutes from now, enabling the Soyuz to drop out of orbit. It's a braking maneuver of 4 minutes, 45 seconds in duration, slowing the Soyuz down. Gravity will capture the Soyuz and enable it to begin its descent back into the Earth's atmosphere. With the deorbit burn complete, the next major milestone would be the separation of the modules that will occur at 8:23 p.m. Central Time. That will happen while the Soyuz is at an altitude of 458,661 feet above the Earth, and finally with the heat shield exposed, that will enable the Soyuz to ablate or repel the buildup of heat and plasma around the spacecraft as temperatures will reach about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Just 3 minutes later, the Soyuz will reach the first traces of the Earth's atmosphere, entry interface as it is known, at an altitude of just over 61.5 miles, or 325,000 feet in altitude. Once the Soyuz passes through the upper reaches of the Earth's atmosphere and the heating is no longer a factor for the Soyuz vehicle, the command will be issued to jettison its heat shield. That will expose the altimeter and the soft landing engines to provide the Soyuz ultimately with altitude information as it approaches the landing site. That will feed into the Soyuz computers to eventually trigger the firing of those soft landing engines just a few seconds before touchdown in a final deceleration maneuver. The command to open the chutes on the Soyuz occurs at 8:35 p.m. Central Time, while the spacecraft and its 3 inhabitants are at an altitude of just over 6.5 miles. That would be about 14 minutes before touchdown.
Did you set the alarm clock? Yes?
GoPro. Да. Значит, 03:49. Может быть, чуть-чуть раньше.
At 3:49, so maybe we can set it earlier.
Я думаю, что
we can.
Это 03:43:40.
At 03:40. So we can probably monitor. 3:50. I think we already monitored that. I think we can activate it again, but it's early. But I do remember it. Don't forget, you will need to strap in.
At the landing site in Kazakhstan, it is now 5:50 in the morning on Monday morning, about 2.5 hours before local sunrise, with the landing of the Soyuz scheduled just 29 minutes after that. And once again, the weather is expected to be quite good, except for sub-freezing temperatures. It is mid-November after all. We're expecting, according to the Spaceflight Meteorology Group and the latest forecast offered by them, just a few clouds at 2,500 feet, some broken clouds at 25,000 feet. Most of that cloud cover will have moved on to the east of the landing site. Light winds at about 8 knots coming from the north. The temperatures will be a bit nippy at about 25 degrees Fahrenheit at landing time. For the 6 crew members on board the International Space Station, they will continue to follow all of the deorbit and landing activities through the time the crew is safely in the medical tent. They'll call it a day after that, and they all have an off-duty day on Monday to catch up on some sleep. It has been an unprecedented flurry of activity for the crew on board the station due to the accelerated launch of Mastracchio, Wakata, and Turin to bring the Olympic torch on board the International Space Station, coupled with a spacewalk that was conducted on Saturday by Kotov and Rosansky, the loading of the torch back into the Soyuz that you see in the field of view from external cameras on the International Space Station as the Soyuz moves across the Northwest Pacific Ocean. Continuing to receive spectacular views of the Soyuz TMA 09M as it progressively moves farther and farther away from the International Space Station. Undocking occurred on time at 5:26 p.m. Central Time as the Soyuz and the International Space Station flew 262 statute miles over northeast Mongolia. Fyodor Yurchikhin, the Soyuz commander, is in the final hours of his 4th flight into space. At the time of touchdown, he will have logged a total of 537 days in space on those 4 flights, 12th on the all-time endurance list. Yurchikhin conducted 3 spacewalks during his time on orbit as part of not only the Expedition 37 crew that he was the commander of, but also Expedition 36 that preceded his assumption of command of the International Space Station. Luca Parmitano, the board engineer number 1, seated in the left seat of the descent module, became the first Italian to walk in space back on July 9th, the first of 2 spacewalks he conducted during his time in space. And Karen Nyberg, who was the prime robotics officer for the arrival of the first Cygnus commercial cargo craft launched by the Orbital Sciences Corporation. Nyberg presided over a wealth of scientific research on board the station. This trio heading home with landing scheduled now just 2 hours and 53 minutes from now.